A call tonight for Singapore's majority Chinese community to be more sensitive to the needs of minorities. Finance Minister Lawrence Wong says that it's harder to be a minority than a majority in any society. At a forum today, he said racism exists in the country and racist acts are unacceptable. Mr. Wong says that the government will keep updating policies to strengthen its unique brand of multi-racialism, which is still far from perfect. His comments come after a spate of racist acts were widely circulated on social media. Deborah Wong reports.
Racism still exists in Singapore. It's among us, in our streets, our neighborhoods, and our workplaces.
There is a race, and you
verbal attacks or physical ones. And sometimes no words or blows are needed at all. The message is clear. No matter the strides Singapore has made on multiracialism, it's still far from perfect. At a forum, Finance Minister Lawrence Wong called on the Chinese community, as the majority race, to be more empathetic.
We must recognize that in any multiracial society, it is harder to be a minority than a majority. This is so everywhere in the world. So it is important for the majority community in Singapore to do its part and be sensitive to and conscious of the needs of minorities. This cuts across all aspects of daily life. It matters to someone who faces discrimination when looking for a job. It matters when someone feels left out, when everyone else in a group speaks in a language that not all can understand. It matters to potential tenants who learn that landlords do not prefer their race. It matters to our students, neighbors, co-workers and friends who have to deal with stereotypes about their race or insensitive comments. These things do happen. Not always, and perhaps not even often, but sometimes they do. And when they do happen, they cause real hurt, which is not erased by lightly dismissing them as casual remarks or jokes.
Turning to the topic of Chinese privilege, Mr. Wong also says the community isn't monolithic. Even among them, there are those who also feel disadvantaged.
We still have a whole generation of Chinese Singaporeans who are more comfortable in Chinese than English and who consider themselves at a disadvantage in an English-speaking world. They feel they have already given up much to bring about a multiracial society. Chinese language schools, Nanyang University, dialects, and so on. What do you mean by Chinese privilege, they were asked, for they do not feel privileged at all. Naturally, many of them would object to being so characterized.
Still, he says even when racism must be called out, discussions must find common ground and not to start arguments.
Let me be clear. I'm not saying that we should refrain from voicing our unhappiness or that minority Singaporeans should pipe down about the prejudices they experience. On the contrary, we should be upfront and honest about the racialized experiences various groups feel and deal squarely with them. But we should not insist on maximum entitlements and rights for our respective groups, construe every compromise as an injustice that needs to be condemned, or put the worst interpretation on every perceived slight or insensitivity.
Doing so will lead to a slippery slope to tribalism, hostility, and even identity politics. Instead, Singapore must steady the course with its own brand of multiculturalism.
We do not devalue diversity, but we accept it and we celebrate it. Multiracialism in Singapore doesn't mean forgetting our separate racial, linguistic, religious, and cultural identities. Instead, it enjoins us to embrace our inheritances, respect those of others, and go beyond them to encompass a national identity and shared purpose.
He says the country arrived at this point in history with much effort from previous generations. That is why race is a cornerstone in Singapore's constitution and policies.
To put it simply, if race did not pose an existential challenge, Singapore would never have separated from Malaysia, and we would never have become an independent sovereign state. But our founding leaders also knew that creating a Singaporean Singapore was not simply a matter of mouthing slogans. They knew we needed deliberate policies, carefully thought out safeguards and resolute efforts to ensure that minorities would be protected, that the majority will not abuse its dominance, that bigots and chauvinists from whatever race would be constrained and curbed.
Still, he acknowledges that these policies need to be refined as society's attitudes evolve.
These are not cast in stone. For any policy, be it GRC, EIP, self-help groups or SAP schools, we continually ask ourselves, what is it we are trying to achieve? Is the policy still relevant today? Can it be further fine-tuned or improved? And one current example is our review of Muslim nurses wearing the tudung with their uniform. This process of policy review entails detailed study and extensive dialogue between the government and our various communities. It cannot be rushed, nor should things be changed simply based on who shouts the loudest.
Ultimately, he says any change must strengthen racial harmony, while giving each group room to go about its way of life.
We must have the humility to acknowledge our multi-racialism is still a work in progress. The honesty to recognize that not everyone will want to move at the same pace, and yet persevere to protect our multi-racialism, cherish it, nurture it, strengthen it. Then step by step, we can approach ever more closely to our ideal, one united people, regardless of race, language, or religion.